The blood on his hands was still warm when Chief Running Eagle spoke the words that would change everything. But let me take you back to where this all began, 3 days earlier, when Jack Morrison rode into territory no white man had dared enter in over a decade. The sun blazed mercilessly over the Dakota Territory as Jack spurred his weathered stallion through the canyon pass. His leather chaps were caked with dust from 2 weeks on the trail, and his water canteen had been empty since dawn. The bounty on the Hendricks gang had led him deep into Lakota territory, farther than any sensible man would venture alone. Jack was not a sensible man. At 30 years old, he had already earned a reputation as one of the most relentless bounty hunters west of the Mississippi. His weathered face bore scars from countless encounters with desperate men, and his steel-gray eyes held the kind of hardness that came from seeing too much death too young. The Colt 45 on his hip had ended more lives than he cared to count, each one justified by the law, each one weighing heavier on his soul. The horse beneath him stumbled slightly, foam gathering at its mouth. They both needed water, and soon. Jack scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of a stream or spring. The landscape stretched endlessly before him, painted in shades of amber and rust, broken only by scattered buffalo grass and the occasional cottonwood tree. That was when he heard it. The sound drifted across the wind like a ghost's whisper, voices carried on the hot air, speaking in a language he did not understand. Jack reined in his mount, every instinct screaming danger. He had learned long ago to trust those instincts. They had kept him alive when others had not been so fortunate. Dismounting quietly, he led his horse behind a cluster of red rocks and crept forward on foot. The voices grew clearer as he approached the ridge, and when he peered over the edge, his breath caught in his throat. Below him stretched a hidden valley, lush and green, fed by a crystal stream that wound through its center. Along the banks stood a collection of teepees, their painted hides bright against the grass. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children played in the shallow water while women gathered wild berries nearby. It was a Lakota village, untouched by the violence that had swept across the territory in recent years. Jack knew he should turn back. The smart play was to retreat, find another route, avoid the confrontation that would surely come if he were discovered. But his horse was near collapse and his own lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst. The stream below might as well have been a mirage for all the good it did him up here. He was weighing his options when the screaming started. The sound cut through the peaceful afternoon like a blade through silk. Women's voices, high and terrified, mixed with the deeper shouts of men. Jack instinctively reached for his gun, then froze as he saw what had caused the chaos. A massive grizzly bear, easily 8 feet tall when it reared on its hind legs, had wandered into the village. Its brown fur was matted and scarred, and something in its movements suggested madness or injury. Foam dripped from its massive jaws as it swayed back and forth. Confused and enraged by the sounds and smells of human habitation, the village erupted into motion. Children scattered like leaves in the wind while their mothers tried to gather them to safety. Warriors emerged from teepees grabbing bows and lances, but the bear was already among them, its massive paws capable of crushing a man's skull with a single swipe. One of the warriors, a young man with eagle feathers in his hair, stepped forward with a spear raised high. The bear turned toward him, and Jack could see immediately that the weapon would not be enough. The animal was too large, too enraged, and the warrior was too close. What happened next would be debated around campfires for generations to come. Jack Morrison, a man who had spent his entire adult life tracking down criminals and outcasts, a man who had no business caring about the fate of people who would likely kill him on sight, raised his rifle and took aim. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder. The bear stumbled, roared in pain and fury, but did not fall. Instead, it turned its attention to this new threat, its small eyes fixing on Jack's position among the rocks. With a speed that defied its massive size, it began to charge up the slope toward him. Jack worked the lever action of his Winchester, chambering another round. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was what he did, face down death and emerge victorious. But as the bear crashed through the brush toward him, growing larger with each thundering step, he wondered if this time might be different. The second shot took the bear in the chest, but still it came. Jack could smell its rank breath now, could see the individual scars that crisscrossed its massive head. He had time for one more shot, maybe two if he was lucky. His finger found the trigger as the bear rose up on its hind legs, massive paws reaching for him. The third shot was perfect. The bullet found its mark just below the bear's left eye, penetrating deep into its brain. The massive animal toppled backward, dead before it hit the ground. The thunderous crash of its body echoed off the canyon walls, and then there was silence. Jack stood over the carcass, smoke still rising from his rifle barrel. His heart hammered against his ribs, and sweat stung his eyes despite the late afternoon chill. Below in the valley, he could see dozens of faces turned up toward him, men, women, and children, staring at the white stranger who had just saved their village. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind rustled through the buffalo grass, and somewhere a hawk cried overhead. Jack knew that he stood at a crossroads. He could mount his horse and ride away, disappearing into the wilderness like a ghost, or he could walk down into that valley and face whatever consequences awaited him there. The choice was made for him when a young woman emerged from behind one of the teepees. She moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, her buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the afternoon light. Her long black hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her dark eyes held an intelligence that seemed to pierce right through him. She could not have been more than 20 years old, but there was something in her bearing that suggested wisdom beyond her years. She walked directly toward the fallen bear, showing no fear of the massive carcass or the armed stranger who stood beside it. When she reached the animal, she knelt and placed one hand on its thick fur, speaking words in her native language that sounded like a prayer or blessing. Then she looked up at Jack, and he felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening in a room that had been locked for years. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but carried clearly in the still air. The words were in English, accented but perfectly understandable. "You have saved many lives today, white man. My father will want to speak with you." Jack found his voice after a moment. "Your father?" She stood gracefully, brushing dust from her dress. "Chief Running Eagle. He leads our people." She gestured toward the village below. "I am called Morning Star." The name suited her perfectly. Jack touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that felt inadequate but was all he had. "Jack Morrison, miss. I did not mean to intrude on your land." A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. "The bear cared nothing for boundaries or intentions. You could have ridden away and left us to face it alone. Why did you not?" It was a question Jack could not answer, at least not in any way that would make sense to her or to himself. He had built his life around clear lines, legal and illegal, guilty and innocent, civilized and savage. But standing here in this hidden valley, looking into Morning Star's dark eyes, those lines seemed to blur and fade. "I do not know," he said finally, and was surprised by his own honesty. She nodded, as if this answer satisfied her completely. "Come. My father waits, and there are protocols that must be observed. You have earned the right to enter our village as a friend, but there are customs older than memory that govern such things." Jack glanced back at his horse, still hidden among the rocks. The animal would be safe enough for now. He shouldered his rifle and followed Morning Star down the steep path toward the valley floor. As they walked, she spoke quietly about her people, her voice creating a strange intimacy despite the circumstances. This was a summer village, she explained, where several bands gathered during the warm months to trade and intermarry and share stories. Her father's authority here was absolute, but it was tempered by a council of elders who advised him on matters of importance. "What will happen now?" Jack asked as they reached the level ground. Morning Star paused at the edge of the village proper. Around them, people had begun to emerge from their hiding places, though they kept a respectful distance. Children peered out from behind their mothers' skirts, their eyes wide with curiosity. Warriors stood in small groups, their hands never far from their weapons, their faces unreadable. "That depends on my father," she said, "and on you. You have done a great service, but you are still a white man in Lakota territory. There are some who will see this as an opportunity for justice given what your people have done to ours." Jack nodded grimly. He knew the history as well as anyone. The broken treaties, the massacres on both sides, the endless cycle of violence that had defined relations between his people and hers. He had no illusions about the danger he faced by coming here, but as he walked through the village beside Morning Star, he found himself caring less about the danger and more about the woman at his side. She moved through her people like water through a stream bed, natural and effortless. Children ran to her with scraped knees and small troubles, and she attended to each one with genuine care, before sending them on their way with gentle words and sometimes a sweet from a pouch at her waist. The teepee they approached was larger than the others, its sides painted with symbols that Jack did not recognize, but somehow understood spoke of power and wisdom earned through long experience. Buffalo hide had been stretched and cured to a golden brown, and the smoke hole at its peak showed the warm glow of a fire within. Morningstar stopped before the entrance and spoke briefly in Lakota. A deep voice responded from inside, and she turned to Jack with an expression that had grown more serious. "He will see you now. Remove your hat and weapons. Speak only when spoken to, and tell the truth always. My father has ways of knowing when a man lies, and the consequences for deception are severe." Jack unbuckled his gun belt and handed it to her, along with his rifle and the knife from his boot. Standing unarmed among potential enemies should have terrified him, but instead he felt oddly calm. Whatever was going to happen had been set in motion the moment he fired that first shot. There was no going back now. He ducked through the entrance flap and found himself in a space that managed to be both intimate and imposing. The air was thick with the scent of sage and sweetgrass, and the fire at the center cast dancing shadows on the curved walls. Seated across from the entrance was a man who could only be Chief Running Eagle. He was perhaps 50 years old, his long hair streaked with silver and decorated with eagle feathers that marked his status. His face was deeply lined, each wrinkle a testament to years of leadership and hard decisions. But his eyes were what held Jack's attention. Dark and penetrating, they seemed to look not just at him, but through him, reading the contents of his soul like words on a page. The chief studied Jack for a long moment without speaking. Then he gestured to a spot across the fire, indicating that Jack should sit. The movement was economical and precise, wasting no energy on unnecessary flourishes. Jack settled cross-legged on the buffalo hide, trying to match the chief's calm demeanor despite the racing of his heart. This close to the fire, he could see the intricate beadwork on Running Eagle's shirt, the careful craftsmanship of his ceremonial weapons hanging on the teepee's frame, the small personal items that spoke of a life lived according to traditions far older than any white settlement. When the chief finally spoke, his voice was deep and measured, each word chosen with care. "You are the one who killed the mad bear." It was not a question, but Jack answered anyway. "Yes, sir. My daughter tells me you could have ridden past our village without stopping, that you chose to intervene when you had no obligation to do so." "The bear was going to kill people," Jack said simply. "I could not let that happen." Running Eagle nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "You speak our language?" "No, sir. Only English. Yet you understood the bear's madness. You saw what needed to be done and did it without hesitation." The chief leaned forward slightly. "What is your name, white man?" "Jack Morrison. I am a bounty hunter by trade. A hunter of men." There was no judgment in the words, just statement of fact. "You track those who run from your people's justice." "Yes. And what brings you to our territory? What man do you hunt here?" Jack hesitated. The truth was complicated, and he was not sure how much to reveal. But Morningstar's warning about deception echoed in his mind, and something in the chief's steady gaze told him that lies would not serve him here. "The Hendricks gang," he said finally. 3 brothers wanted for murder and robbery. They crossed into Lakota territory 2 weeks ago, thinking to lose themselves where white law could not follow. Running Eagle's expression darkened. "We know these men. They killed 2 of our hunters 3 days past, stole their horses and weapons. We have been tracking them ourselves." This was news to Jack, and unwelcome news at that. If the Lakota were already hunting the Hendricks gang, his presence here was not just dangerous but potentially provocative. Competing claims for the same prey had started wars before. "I had no knowledge of this," he said carefully. "If your people have prior claim—" The chief raised a hand, cutting him off. "The claim is yours now, Jack Morrison. You have earned it with the life of the mad bear, my daughter's life, and the lives of many others." Jack felt confusion wash over him. "I do not understand." Running Eagle stood with fluid grace despite his age, moving to one of the teepee's support poles, where a ceremonial pipe hung in a place of honor. He lifted it reverently, running his fingers along its carved stem. "Among our people, there are debts that cannot be repaid with goods or horses or even gold. When a man saves lives at the risk of his own, when he acts with honor toward those who are not his people, such a debt requires a different kind of payment." The chief turned back to Jack, the pipe cradled in his hands like something sacred. "Our law is old, Jack Morrison, older than your towns or your forts or your railroad. It speaks of obligations between men, of honor that transcends the color of skin or the language of birth. Jack remained silent, sensing that something momentous was building in the warm air of the teepee. Running Eagle continued, his voice taking on the cadence of ritual. When a warrior saves the tribe from great danger, when his courage preserves the lives of our children and elders, he earns the right to ask for anything within our power to give. This is sacred law, unchanged since the time of our grandfathers' grandfathers. The implications of these words began to dawn on Jack, and with them came a mixture of anticipation and dread. "But," the chief said, and Jack heard the weight of centuries in that single word, "when a man acts with such honor that his deed cannot be rewarded with material things, when his courage saves not just lives, but the future of our people, then the sacred law speaks differently." Running Eagle moved to the teepee's entrance, pushing aside the flap to reveal the village beyond. Jack could see people gathering in the fading light, their faces turned toward the chief's lodge with expressions of expectation and excitement. "In such cases," Running Eagle said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air, "the sacred law declares that the hero has earned the greatest gift our people can bestow." Jack's mouth went dry. He thought he knew where this was leading, but the magnitude of it seemed impossible to comprehend. The chief's next words confirmed his suspicions and changed his life forever. "Jack Morrison, by the sacred law of our people, by the old covenant that binds us to honor above all things, I offer you my daughter Morning Star as wife. She is yours by right, earned with courage and sealed with the blood of the mad bear." The words hit Jack like physical blows. He sat in stunned silence as their meaning penetrated the shock that had numbed his mind. Outside he could hear voices rising in what sounded like celebration, the news spreading through the village like wildfire. Morning Star, the beautiful young woman who had spoken to him with such intelligence and grace, the daughter of a chief, a princess in her own right, now being offered to him like a prize to be claimed. The very idea was so far beyond anything he had imagined that he could barely process it. He was a bounty hunter, a drifter with no home and no family, a man whose hands were stained with blood and whose future held nothing but more violence and loneliness. What could he possibly offer a woman like Morning Star? But even as these thoughts raced through his mind, he remembered the moment when their eyes had met over the bear's carcass. The way she had looked at him, not with fear or suspicion, but with something that might have been recognition, as if she had been waiting for him without knowing it. Running Eagle had returned to his place by the fire, watching Jack's face with keen interest. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler, more paternal. "This troubles you." Jack found his voice with effort. "Chief Running Eagle, I am honored beyond words by your offer, but I am not worthy of your daughter. I am a violent man, a killer by profession. I have no home to offer her, no future that would bring her happiness." The chief nodded as if he had expected this response. "Tell me, Jack Morrison, why did you kill the bear?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Jack struggled to understand its relevance. "Because it was going to kill innocent people, and when you saw the danger, what did you think of?" "Nothing. I just acted." "You did not think of the reward you might earn, the gratitude of a chief's daughter?" "No, there was no time to think of such things." Running Eagle smiled for the first time since Jack had entered the teepee, and the expression transformed his weathered face completely. "This is why you are worthy, Jack Morrison. A man who acts without thought of reward, who risks his life for strangers, who saves children he has never seen before and will never see again. Such a man carries honor in his heart, whether he knows it or not." The chief leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You say you are a killer, and this may be true, but today you chose to be a protector. You say you have no home, and this also may be true. But a home can be built by two people who choose to build it together." Jack felt the weight of decision pressing down on him like a physical thing. Everything in his rational mind told him this was impossible, that the gulf between his world and Morning Star's was too vast to bridge. But something deeper, something he had kept buried for years, whispered that this might be his one chance at redemption. "What does Morning Star think of this?" he asked finally. Running Eagle's smile widened. "Why do you not ask her yourself?" As if summoned by his words, the teepee flap moved aside and Morning Star entered. She had changed from her everyday dress into something more formal, soft white buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork in blues and golds, with a matching band around her forehead that held a single eagle feather. She looked every inch the chief's daughter, regal and beautiful, and completely out of reach for a man like Jack. But when her eyes met his across the fire, he saw the same spark of connection that had passed between them earlier. Whatever else might be impossible about this situation, the attraction between them was real and mutual. She settled gracefully beside her father, her movements fluid and controlled, despite what must have been extraordinary circumstances for her as well. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured. "Jack Morrison, my father has told you of our sacred law." "He has. And you understand what this means?" Jack nodded, not trusting his voice. Morningstar studied his face for a long moment, and he had the unsettling feeling that she was reading his thoughts as easily as her father had done. "You are afraid," she said finally. It was not a question. "Yes," Jack admitted. "This is not a world I know. These are not customs I understand. I would not want to bring dishonor to you or your people through my ignorance." She nodded as if this answer pleased her. "Fear of causing harm to others is the beginning of wisdom. But tell me, Jack Morrison, when you saw the bear attacking our village, were you afraid then?" "Terrified," he said honestly. "Yet you acted anyway." "Yes. Why?" It was the same question her father had asked, but coming from her lips it seemed to carry different weight. Jack found himself searching for an answer that would encompass not just his actions but his feelings, the complex mixture of instinct and choice that had led him to this moment. "Because some things matter more than fear," he said finally. Morningstar smiled and the expression lit up the entire teepee. "Then you understand our people better than you know." She turned to her father, speaking briefly in Lakota. Running Eagle listened, then nodded gravely. "My daughter wishes to know your intentions," the chief said. "The sacred law gives you the right to claim her as wife, but it does not compel you to do so. The choice, ultimately, is yours." Jack looked from father to daughter, these two people who represented everything he had never allowed himself to want. A family, a home, a chance to be something more than just a hunter of desperate men. But with the wanting came the fear, not of physical danger, but of failure, of disappointing them, of proving unworthy of the gift they were offering. "If I were to accept," he said carefully, "what would be expected of me?" Running Eagle considered the question seriously. "You would become one of our people, but you would not cease to be yourself. Your skills, your knowledge of the white world, these would be valued. You would hunt for the tribe, provide for your family, defend our people when danger threatens. In return, you would have a place of honor, a voice in our councils and the protection of our warriors should you need it. And the Hendricks gang would become a matter for the tribe to handle. Our law now supersedes your white law in this matter." Jack felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The gang that had driven him into Lakota territory would still need to be dealt with, but the burden would no longer be his alone. He looked at Morningstar again, trying to read the thoughts behind her dark eyes. What did she see when she looked at him? A dangerous stranger? A potential husband? A man who might bring trouble to her people? As if sensing his thoughts, she spoke directly to him for the first time since entering the teepee. "You wonder what I think of all this?" "Yes," he admitted. She was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant as if looking at something beyond the teepee walls. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but clear. "I have lived 20 summers, Jack Morrison. I have seen many warriors, many brave men. Some have asked my father for my hand, offering horses and weapons and promises of great deeds. But when I looked at them, I saw only what they wanted from me, not what they might give." She turned her full attention back to him, and Jack felt the intensity of her regard like heat from the fire. "When I saw you standing over the dead bear, when I watched you walk unarmed into our village despite the danger, I saw something different. I saw a man who gives before he takes, who acts from the heart, even when the mind counsels caution." Jack felt his chest tighten with an emotion he could not name. Morningstar continued, "The sacred law gives you the right to claim me, but I would not be claimed by a man I did not choose. So I ask you now, Jack Morrison, do you want me as a wife or do you want me as a prize?" The question cut straight to the heart of his dilemma. Jack had spent so many years thinking of himself as a hunter, a taker, a man who solved problems with violence. The idea that he might be worthy of being chosen rather than simply claiming what was offered seemed almost revolutionary. "I want to be worthy of being chosen," he said quietly. Morningstar smiled again, and this time it was radiant. "Then you already are." She stood and moved to where Jack sat, extending her hand to him. When he took it, her fingers were warm and strong, calloused from years of work, but gentle in their touch. "I choose you, Jack Morrison," she said formally, her words carrying the weight of ritual, "not because the sacred law declares it, but because my heart declares it." Running Eagle watched this exchange with obvious approval, then rose to his feet with ceremonial dignity. "It is decided, then. Jack Morrison, you will be welcomed into our tribe as son and warrior. Morning Star, daughter of my heart, you will be wed according to our customs when the moon is full again, 3 days hence." 3 days. The words hit Jack like cold water, making the enormity of what he was agreeing to suddenly real and immediate. In 3 days he would be married to this remarkable woman. In 3 days his entire life would change forever. But as he looked into Morningstar's eyes, saw the mixture of excitement and nervousness there that probably matched his own expression, he found that he was not afraid anymore. Uncertain, yes. Overwhelmed, absolutely. But not afraid. For the first time in years, he was moving toward something instead of just running from it. "There will be ceremonies," Running Eagle continued, settling back by the fire. "Rituals to welcome you into the tribe, preparations for the wedding feast. But first you must prove yourself worthy not just in courage, which you have already done, but in understanding." "What kind of understanding?" Jack asked. "You must learn our ways, our customs, our beliefs. Not to abandon your own, but to build bridges between our worlds. Morningstar will teach you, but the learning must come from within." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "I will do whatever is required." "Good." The chief's expression grew more serious. "But first, there is the matter of the Hendricks gang. They must be dealt with before the wedding can take place. Their presence on our land is an insult that cannot be ignored, and their crimes against our people demand justice." "What do you propose?" Running Eagle studied Jack for a long moment. "You will lead a war party to track them down, but you will not go as a white bounty hunter seeking payment. You will go as a member of this tribe, seeking justice for wrongs done to your people." The distinction was subtle but important. Jack was no longer a lone wolf hunting for money. He was part of something larger now, with obligations and support that went beyond personal gain. "When do we leave?" "At dawn. The trail is already 3 days old, and the Hendricks brothers are cunning. But we have advantages they do not expect." Morningstar squeezed Jack's hand gently. "I will help prepare you," she said. "There are things you must know about fighting alongside our warriors." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and explanations. Jack met the men who would ride with him. Seasoned warriors with names like Swift Arrow and Broken Lance, men whose respect had to be earned, but who seemed willing to give him a chance based on his actions with the bear. He learned the basics of Lakota customs around warfare, the importance of honor over mere victory, the rituals that preceded and followed battle, the way decisions were made collectively rather than by single command. Most importantly, he spent time with Morningstar, learning not just about tribal customs but about her as a person. She was educated in ways that surprised him, fluent in English and French as well as Lakota, knowledgeable about both Indian and white politics, skilled in healing arts as well as traditional women's crafts. But it was her spirit that captivated him most. She had a way of finding humor in serious situations, of asking questions that made him think about familiar things in new ways. When he told her about his life as a bounty hunter, she listened without judgment, asking not about the violence but about the loneliness. "Did you never want something more?" she asked as they walked along the stream in the gathering darkness. "I told myself I did not," Jack replied honestly. "It seemed safer that way." "And now?" He stopped walking and turned to face her. In the moonlight, she looked ethereal, like something from a dream. But her hand in his was warm and real, anchoring him to the moment. "Now I want everything I was afraid to want before," he said. "A home, a family, someone to fight for instead of just fighting." She reached up and touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. "How did this happen?" "Knife fight in Abilene. The man I was tracking did not want to be taken alive." "And did you kill him?" "Yes." She nodded, accepting this without flinching. "Tomorrow you will hunt again, but not alone. How does that make you feel?" Jack considered the question. "Responsible," he said finally, "when it was just me. The only life at risk was my own. Now you have brothers who will stand with you, and a woman who will wait for your return." Her voice was soft but firm. "Does this frighten you?" "Yes," he admitted. "What if I fail them? What if you succeed?" It was such a simple question, but it cut through all his fears and doubts like a blade through leather. Jack realized that he had spent so many years preparing for failure that he had forgotten how to hope for success. "I do not know," he said. "I have never really succeeded at anything that mattered." Morningstar smiled and pulled his head down so she could kiss his forehead gently. "Then it is time to learn." They returned to the village as the last light faded from the western sky. Cooking fires glowed like stars scattered across the valley floor, and the sound of voices and laughter drifted on the evening air. It was a scene of such peaceful domesticity that Jack could hardly believe such places still existed in a world that seemed increasingly defined by violence and greed. "This will all be yours too," Morningstar said, following his gaze. "These people, this place, this life. Are you ready for such a thing?" Jack thought of all the hotel rooms and saloons and dusty trails that had defined his existence for so many years. The idea of belonging somewhere, of having people who cared whether he came home at night, was almost too wonderful to believe. "I want to be," he said. "That is enough for now," she replied. "The rest will come with time." They parted at her father's teepee, where Jack would spend the night as an honored guest before joining the war party at dawn. Morningstar squeezed his hand one last time before disappearing into the dwelling she shared with the other unmarried women of the tribe. Jack lay awake for a long time that night, staring up through the smoke hole at the stars wheeling overhead. Tomorrow he would ride out to face the Hendricks gang, but for the first time in his life he would not be riding alone. He would have brothers beside him, people counting on his success, a future worth fighting for. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, as he finally drifted off to sleep, Jack Morrison felt something he had not experienced in years. He felt hope. Dawn came cold and gray, painting the Dakota sky in shades of steel and promise. Jack woke to the sound of horses being prepared and warriors making final checks of their weapons. The reality of what lay ahead settled over him like a familiar weight. The hunt, the confrontation, the violence that would determine whether he lived to see his wedding day. But this time, everything was different. Swift Arrow appeared at the teepee entrance, his face painted with traditional war symbols in red and black. He was perhaps 25 years old, lean and hard as rawhide, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He had been chosen by Chief Running Eagle to serve as Jack's guide and translator, a responsibility he took seriously. "It is time," he said simply. Jack gathered his weapons, returned to him along with additional gear provided by the tribe. A Lakota war shield, decorated with eagle feathers, a bone-handled knife to complement his own blade, and a magnificent bow crafted from seasoned yew. He was still primarily a gunfighter, but these additions marked his acceptance into the warrior brotherhood. Outside, 5 other men waited with their mounts. Jack recognized them from the previous evening's introductions, but seeing them now in full war regalia drove home the gravity of their mission. These were not soldiers following orders or hired guns seeking profit. They were protectors of their people, and they had accepted him as one of their own. Broken Lance, the eldest of the group at perhaps 40 years, nodded respectfully as Jack approached. His weathered face bore the scars of many battles, and his grey-streaked hair was adorned with coop feathers earned through acts of exceptional bravery. He would serve as war leader, a role Jack accepted without question, despite his greater experience with the Hendricks gang. "The trail leads north toward the Badlands," Broken Lance said, his English heavily accented but clear. "They seek to lose themselves in the maze of canyons there. It is good ground for hiding, but also good ground for trapping." Jack studied the map drawn in the dirt at their feet, recognizing the terrain from his earlier pursuit. "They know that country well. The eldest brother Samuel used to run cattle through there before he turned outlaw." "Then we must be cleverer than they are familiar," Swift Arrow said with a grim smile. The war party mounted their horses as the village began to stir around them. Women emerged from teepees to see their men off, children peeked out curiously, and elders offered quiet blessings for a successful hunt. It was a scene that had played out countless times over generations, but for Jack it felt like stepping into history itself. As they prepared to ride out, Morningstar appeared at Jack's side. She moved silently, like morning mist, and for a moment he wondered if she was real or just a dream born of hope and desperation. "You go to prove yourself worthy," she said softly, her hand touching his leg where it rested against his horse's flank. "But you have already proven yourself to me." "I will come back," he promised, though both of them knew such promises were fragile things in a world where bullets and blades decided outcomes. She smiled and pressed something into his hand, a small medicine pouch made of soft leather and decorated with blue beads that matched her eyes. "For protection," she said, "and to remind you that someone waits for your return." Jack tied the pouch to his gun belt, feeling its slight weight like an anchor to hope. Then, without another word, he wheeled his horse toward the canyon mouth and followed his new brothers into the rising sun. The trail was 3 days old but still readable to eyes trained in such things. The Hendricks brothers had made no effort to hide their passage, confident that they had outdistanced any pursuit. Their arrogance would be their undoing, but Jack knew better than to underestimate desperate men with nothing left to lose. As they rode, Broken Lance shared what the tribe had learned about their quarry. Samuel Hendricks was the leader and the most dangerous, a former Confederate officer who had turned to crime after the war ended. His brothers Thomas and William were followers rather than leaders, but both were skilled with weapons and utterly loyal to Samuel's vision of taking what they wanted from a world that had given them nothing. "They killed our hunters for sport," Swift Arrow said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Shot them down like animals and left their bodies for the carrion birds. This is not war. This is murder." Jack nodded grimly. He had tracked the gang for months, following a trail of robbery and violence that stretched from Kansas to the Dakota Territory. But learning of their crimes against the Lakota added a personal dimension that made this hunt different from all the others. They pushed hard through the morning, their horses eating up the miles with the steady pace of animals bred for endurance rather than speed. The landscape gradually changed around them, growing more rugged and broken as they approached the Badlands. Red rock formations thrust up from the earth like ancient monuments, and the very air seemed to carry the weight of geological time. By midday, they had closed the gap considerably. The signs were fresher now, horse droppings that still held warmth, disturbed ground where the outlaws had made camp the previous night. The Hendricks gang was less than half a day ahead, moving more slowly as they navigated the increasingly difficult terrain. "We will catch them before sunset," Broken Lance predicted as they paused to rest their horses beside a trickling stream. "The question is where and how." Jack studied the country ahead through field glasses borrowed from Swift Arrow. The maze of canyons and mesas would provide plenty of opportunities for ambush, but it would also make escape routes numerous and difficult to block. A conventional pursuit might easily turn into a running fight that could last for days. "There," he said finally, pointing to a narrow pass between two towering rock formations. "They will have to go through there to reach the deep Badlands, if we can get ahead of them." "A trap," Broken Lance said approvingly. "You think like a warrior, not just a hunter." It was a compliment that meant more to Jack than any bounty he had ever collected. These men were trusting him not just with their lives, but with their honor, their duty to protect their people. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a familiar burden, but one he now carried gladly. They split into 2 groups to execute the plan. Broken Lance would lead 3 warriors in a flanking movement designed to drive the Hendricks gang toward the pass, while Jack and Swift Arrow positioned themselves to block the escape route. It was a classic pincer movement, simple in concept, but requiring precise timing and nerve to execute. Jack and Swift Arrow reached their position just as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The pass was perhaps 50 yards wide, with steep walls on either side that would make climbing out under fire nearly impossible. If the plan worked, the outlaws would find themselves caught in a crossfire with nowhere to run. They waited in silence, pressed against the red rock wall with weapons ready. Jack felt the familiar pre-battle calm settling over him, that strange state of heightened awareness where time seemed to slow and every detail became sharp and clear. But underneath the professional focus was something new, the knowledge that he was fighting not just for money or justice, but for the future he had never dared to imagine. The sound of approaching horses echoed off the canyon walls long before the riders came into view. Jack counted them by sound. 3 horses moving at a steady pace, their riders confident and unsuspecting. The Hendricks brothers were walking straight into the trap. Samuel appeared first, a tall man with a black beard and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His brothers flanked him, both younger and leaner, but sharing the hard eyes and casual cruelty that marked them as killers. They rode good horses and carried quality weapons, the fruits of their criminal career. Jack waited until all 3 were well into the pass before stepping out from cover, his rifle trained on Samuel's chest. Swift Arrow emerged from the opposite wall at the same moment, bow drawn and arrow nocked. "Samuel Hendricks," Jack called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You are under arrest for murder, robbery, and crimes against the Lakota people." The outlaws reined in their horses, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons before the reality of their situation became clear. They were trapped in a killing ground with nowhere to run and enemies on all sides. Samuel's eyes found Jack's face, and recognition dawned slowly. "Jack Morrison," he said with something like admiration. "I heard you were the best tracker in the territory. Did not expect you to team up with savages, though." The casual slur sent anger flashing through Jack, hot and immediate. These men had murdered innocent people, violated sacred ground, and now showed not even the decency to acknowledge their crimes. Whatever sympathy he might have felt for desperate men died in that moment. "Surrender your weapons," he commanded. "You will be taken back to face justice." Samuel laughed, a sound without humor or warmth. "Justice? From a bunch of redskins and a turncoat bounty hunter? I think not." The eldest Hendricks brother was already reaching for his gun as he spoke, his hand moving with the fluid motion of a man who had survived countless gunfights. But Jack was ready for him, his own weapon already aimed and steady. The canyon erupted in gunfire. Jack's first shot took Samuel in the chest, spinning him from his saddle before his own weapon cleared leather. Swift Arrow's arrow found Thomas Hendricks in the shoulder, sending him tumbling to the ground with a cry of pain and rage. William, the youngest brother, managed to get his gun out and return fire, his bullet chipping stone inches from Jack's head. But before William could fire again, the rest of the war party appeared at the mouth of the pass, cutting off any hope of escape. Broken Lance's war cry echoed off the canyon walls as he charged forward, followed by his warriors with weapons raised. William Hendricks looked around desperately, seeing death closing in from all sides. His horse reared and pawed the air as he tried to control the animal and reload his weapon at the same time. It was too much to manage under fire, and his second shot went wild. Jack's answering bullet did not. William pitched forward over his horse's neck, then slid sideways to the red earth of the canyon floor. He moved once, tried to reach for his fallen gun, then lay still. Thomas Hendricks was still alive but badly wounded, Swift Arrow's arrow having pierced his shoulder and lodged against the bone. He sat propped against a boulder, blood seeping through his fingers as he tried to apply pressure to the wound. "Please," he gasped as the warriors surrounded him. "I surrender. I give up." Broken Lance dismounted and walked slowly toward the wounded outlaw, his face impassive. In his hand was a war club carved from hardwood and decorated with iron studs, a weapon that had seen much use over the years. "You killed our hunters," he said in English, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "You took their scalps as trophies. You defiled sacred ground with their blood." Thomas's eyes widened with fear as he realized what was coming. "It was Samuel's idea. I just followed orders. I never wanted to hurt nobody." "Your wants do not matter now," Broken Lance replied. "Only justice matters." The war club rose and fell once, with terrible finality. Thomas Hendricks died without making another sound. Jack watched this execution without flinching, understanding that it was necessary according to the laws and customs of the people he had chosen to join. These men had committed crimes that demanded blood payment, and mercy would have been seen as weakness that might encourage other outlaws to prey upon the tribe. But seeing justice done and feeling comfortable with it were different things. As they gathered the outlaws' weapons and horses, Jack found himself thinking about the choices that had led all of them to this moment. Different decisions, different circumstances, and perhaps he might have ended up on the wrong side of such a confrontation. Swift Arrow seemed to sense his thoughts. "You are troubled by what happened here." "Not troubled exactly," Jack said carefully, "but thinking about how thin the line can be between hunter and hunted." The young warrior nodded thoughtfully. "This is wisdom. A man who kills without understanding the weight of it becomes a monster. But a man who refuses to kill when justice demands it becomes a victim." They made camp that night in a sheltered canyon, several miles from the scene of the fight. The bodies of the Hendricks brothers would be left for the carrion birds, a deliberate message to any other outlaws who might consider Lakota territory a safe haven for their crimes. As the war party gathered around their fire, sharing food and recounting the day's events, Jack felt something shift inside him. The successful completion of his first mission as a tribal warrior had earned him acceptance that went beyond mere tolerance. These men were treating him as a brother now, including him in their stories and jokes with an ease that spoke of genuine respect. But more than that, he had proven something to himself. He could be part of something larger without losing his identity. His skills as a fighter and tracker were valued, but they were no longer the only things that defined him. "Tomorrow we return home," Broken Lance announced as the fire burned low. "The elders will want to hear of this victory, and there is a wedding to prepare for." The reminder of what awaited him back at the village sent a mixture of excitement and nervousness through Jack's chest. In 2 days he would marry Morningstar and begin a completely new life. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Swift Arrow must have seen something in his expression, because he grinned and clapped Jack on the shoulder. "You face armed killers without fear, but the thought of one small woman makes you nervous." The other warriors laughed at this observation, but it was good-natured rather than mocking. They had all been young men once, facing the mysteries and responsibilities of marriage. "She is not just any woman," Jack said. "She is the chief's daughter. What if I disappoint her? What if I cannot be the husband she deserves?" "Then you will learn," Broken Lance said simply. "Marriage is not a destination, Jack Morrison. It is a journey. 2 people walking the same path, helping each other when the way becomes difficult." An older warrior named Grey Wolf spoke up from across the fire. "My wife and I have been married for 23 summers. I still disappoint her regularly." This brought another round of laughter. "The trick is to disappoint her in small ways so she notices the big ways you do not disappoint her." "What kind of small ways?" Jack asked, genuinely curious. "Forgetting to bring in firewood when she asks, tracking mud through the teepee after she has cleaned it, telling the same story too many times when we have guests." Grey Wolf's eyes twinkled with mischief. "But I never forget to tell her she is beautiful. I never fail to defend her honor. I never let a day pass without showing her that she is valued." Jack absorbed this wisdom, along with the warmth of the fire and the companionship of men who had accepted him as one of their own. For the first time in his adult life, he was part of a community that cared about his happiness and success. It was a strange feeling, but one he found himself treasuring. They rode hard the next day, eager to return home with news of their victory. The horses seemed to sense their rider's mood, stepping lively despite the miles already traveled. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the hidden valley, Jack felt his heart lift at the sight of the village spread out below. But something was wrong. There were too many horses gathered near the chief's teepee, too much activity for a normal afternoon. Even from this distance, Jack could see people moving with the urgent purpose that spoke of crisis or emergency. Broken Lance had noticed it too, his face growing grim as he studied the scene below. "Trouble," he said simply, then spurred his horse into a gallop down the slope. They reached the village to find it in controlled chaos. Warriors were checking weapons and gear while women packed supplies with efficient haste. Children had been gathered into groups under the watchful eyes of their elders, and the entire atmosphere spoke of preparation for conflict. Chief Running Eagle emerged from his tipi as the war party dismounted, his face grave with concern. Behind him came Morning Star, and Jack felt relief wash over him at seeing her safe and unharmed. "Father," Broken Lance said formally, "we bring news of victory. The Hendricks brothers are dead and their crimes have been answered." Running Eagle nodded approvingly, but his expression remained troubled. "Good. Justice has been served. But we face a new threat now, one that may test us more severely than any band of outlaws." "What has happened?" Jack asked, moving to Morning Star's side and taking her hand. "Soldiers," she said quietly. "A cavalry patrol from Fort Robinson, led by a captain named Mitchell. They arrived this morning with orders to investigate reports of white men being killed in Lakota territory." Jack felt ice form in his stomach. Captain Daniel Mitchell was known throughout the territory as an Indian fighter with little patience for diplomatic niceties. He had built his reputation on swift, decisive action against any tribe he deemed hostile, and his definition of hostility was notably broad. "How many men?" he asked. 30 soldiers, Running Eagle replied. "Well armed and mounted." The captain demanded to speak with whoever was responsible for killing the Hendricks gang. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That the killers were brought to justice by tribal law for crimes committed against our people." But he was not satisfied with this answer. Jack could imagine Mitchell's reaction. The captain would see only Indians who had killed white men, regardless of the circumstances or justification. The fact that Jack had been involved would complicate matters further. A white man working with Indians against other whites would be viewed as betrayal of the worst kind. "Where are they now?" he asked. "Camped by the stream, just outside our territory but close enough to watch our movements," Morningstar said. "Captain Mitchell gave us until sunset to produce the killers for military justice. If we refuse—" She did not need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what would happen if the tribe defied military authority. There would be a fight, and regardless of who won, the consequences would ripple outward to affect all the Lakota bands in the region. "This is my fault," Jack said heavily. "I brought this trouble to your people." Running Eagle placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You brought justice to killers and honor to yourself. The soldiers bring their own trouble. They would have found some excuse for conflict eventually. But what now?" Swift Arrow asked. "Do we fight? Do we run? Do we surrender our brother to save the village?" The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications that went far beyond this single confrontation. How they handled this crisis would determine not just Jack's fate, but the future relationship between the tribe and the military authorities. Broken Lance was the first to speak. "We do not abandon our brothers. Jack Morrison earned his place among us with courage and blood. To give him up now would be to become something less than we are." Murmurs of agreement came from the other warriors, but Jack could see the worry in their eyes. They were brave men, willing to fight for what they believed in, but they also had families to protect and futures to consider. "There might be another way," Jack said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "What if I went to them, not as a surrender, but as a negotiation?" Morningstar's grip on his hand tightened. "That would be suicide. Captain Mitchell is not known for listening to explanations." "Maybe not, but I am still a white man, still technically a bounty hunter. I might be able to convince him that this was a legitimate law enforcement action, not an Indian uprising." Running Eagle considered this possibility. "And if he refuses to listen, if he decides to make an example of you, then at least the tribe would be clear of blame. You could honestly say that a white bounty hunter acted on his own authority to bring in wanted criminals." It was a desperate plan, built more on hope than solid reasoning. But as Jack looked around at the faces of people who had become his family, he knew he had to try. The alternative was a fight that could destroy everything they had built here. "I will not let you face this alone," Morningstar said firmly. "If you go to them, I go with you." "Absolutely not," Jack replied immediately. "It is too dangerous." Her dark eyes flashed with determination. "I am the daughter of Chief Running Eagle. My presence would show that this is a diplomatic mission, not an act of war. Captain Mitchell may be a harsh man, but he is not stupid. He knows the consequences of harming a chief's daughter." The logic was sound, but the thought of putting Morningstar in danger made Jack's chest tight with fear. He had already lost so much in his life. He could not bear the thought of losing her before their life together had even begun. But before he could voice his objections, Running Eagle spoke with the authority of absolute command. "My daughter speaks wisdom. This crisis requires diplomacy as well as courage. Jack Morrison, you will go to the soldiers and speak for our people. Morningstar will accompany you as my representative. Broken Lance will lead a war party to within sight of their camp, close enough to intervene if treachery occurs." It was decided then. In 1 hour, Jack would ride out to face Captain Mitchell and try to prevent a conflict that could spiral into something much larger and more destructive. The stakes could not be higher. Not just his own life, but the safety of everyone in the village and the future relationship between their peoples. As the tribe prepared for what might come, Jack found himself alone with Morningstar for a few precious minutes. They sat by the stream that ran through the heart of the village, watching the water flow past with the eternal patience of natural things. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly. "Terrified," he admitted. "Not of dying. I have faced that many times, but of failing you, of bringing disaster to your people because of my choices." She turned to face him fully, her hands framing his face with gentle intensity. "Jack Morrison, in 2 days you have saved our village from a mad bear, brought justice to murderers and proven yourself a true warrior. You have earned the right to be called brother by men who give that title rarely. Most importantly, you have given me hope for a future I never dared to imagine." She leaned forward and kissed him softly, a promise and a blessing combined. "Whatever happens today, you have already succeeded in all the ways that matter." They rode out as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed like an omen of the fire to come. Jack sat straight in his saddle, wearing the clothes of a white bounty hunter, but carrying the weapons and confidence of a Lakota warrior. Beside him, Morning Star rode like the princess she was, every inch of her bearing speaking of dignity and authority. The cavalry camp was exactly where Running Eagle had said it would be, positioned to observe the village while remaining technically outside tribal territory. It was a professional setup, with guards posted and horses picketed in military precision. These were experienced soldiers led by an officer who knew his business. Captain Mitchell emerged from his tent as they approached, and Jack sized him up with the eye of a man who had learned to read dangerous opponents. The captain was perhaps 40 years old, lean and hard as seasoned leather, with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. His uniform was clean despite days in the field, and his weapons were well maintained. This was not a man who could be easily fooled or intimidated. "Captain Mitchell," Jack called out as they entered the camp perimeter, "I am Jack Morrison, bounty hunter. I believe you wanted to speak with me." The captain's eyes moved from Jack to Morning Star and back again, taking in every detail of their appearance and demeanor. When he spoke, his voice carried the clipped authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Mr. Morrison, I have indeed been looking forward to our conversation, and you, Miss, would be." Morning Star sat straighter in her saddle, every inch the chief's daughter. "I am Morning Star, daughter of Chief Running Eagle. I come as witness and translator for these proceedings." Mitchell nodded slowly, though his expression remained neutral. "Very well. Dismount and join me in my tent. We have much to discuss." The tent was spartanly furnished but comfortable, with camp chairs arranged around a folding table covered with maps and official documents. Mitchell gestured for them to sit, then poured coffee from a pot kept warm over a small brazier. "Now then," he said, settling into his own chair with the deliberate movements of a careful man, "suppose you tell me exactly what happened to the Hendricks brothers." Jack took a deep breath and began the story from the beginning. His pursuit of the gang, his encounter with the bear, his acceptance into the tribe, and finally the successful hunt that had ended with the outlaws' deaths. He left out nothing important, presenting the facts in a clear, straightforward manner that emphasized the legal justification for his actions. Mitchell listened without interruption, his pale eyes never leaving Jack's face. When the tale was finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied his visitors with the intensity of a man trying to solve a complex puzzle. "An interesting story, Mr. Morrison. Quite remarkable, in fact, but it raises as many questions as it answers." "What kind of questions, Captain?" "Questions about jurisdiction, for one thing. The Hendricks gang was wanted by federal authorities. Their capture and punishment fell under military law, not tribal justice." Jack felt the conversation sliding toward dangerous ground. The gang committed crimes against the Lakota people on Lakota territory. That gave the tribe clear authority to act. Perhaps. "But you are not Lakota, are you, Mr. Morrison? You are a white man, a citizen of the United States, operating under federal bounty hunting licenses. Your participation in this affair makes it a federal matter by definition." Morning Star spoke for the first time since they had entered the tent. "Captain Mitchell, with respect, my people have the right to defend themselves against criminals who prey upon them. The color of our allies' skin does not change the justice of our cause." Mitchell's attention shifted to her, and Jack could see him reassessing the situation. Dealing with an Indian princess required different tactics than dealing with a renegade bounty hunter. "Miss Morning Star, I understand your position, but surely you can see mine as well. I have reports of white men killed by Indians. If I simply ignore this because the victims were criminals, what message does that send to other tribes? What precedent does it establish?" It was a fair point, and Jack could see the genuine dilemma behind Mitchell's hard exterior. The captain was not just a soldier following orders. He was trying to maintain a delicate balance between competing authorities and conflicting interests. "What would satisfy you, Captain?" Jack asked. "What would resolve this situation to everyone's benefit?" Mitchell stood and moved to the tent entrance, gazing out at his camp, where soldiers went about their duties with practiced efficiency. When he turned back, his expression had softened slightly. "I need something I can report to my superiors that shows proper authority was observed. Some acknowledgement that federal law takes precedence over tribal law when United States citizens are involved." Jack felt the pieces of a solution beginning to come together in his mind. What if the tribe formally requested federal assistance in apprehending dangerous criminals? What if the killings were the result of officially sanctioned cooperation between tribal and federal authorities? The captain's eyebrows rose slightly. "Go on." Chief Running Eagle sends a formal request to the military for help dealing with the Hendricks gang. You authorize me to act as a special deputy in pursuing them. The tribe provides warriors to assist in the capture. When the outlaws resist arrest and threaten lives, they are killed in the line of duty. Mitchell considered this carefully, clearly intrigued by the possibility. It would require some creative paperwork, and it would set a precedent for future cooperation between our authorities. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Morningstar asked. Our peoples need not be enemies, Captain. There are enough real threats in this territory without creating new ones through misunderstanding. For the first time since they had entered the tent, Mitchell smiled. It was a small expression, quickly controlled, but it suggested a man who was more complex than his stern exterior indicated. You argue persuasively, Miss Morningstar, and you, Mr. Morrison, show considerable skill at finding solutions to difficult problems. He moved back to his chair and sat down heavily. Very well. Here is what I propose. Jack held his breath as the captain outlined his terms. A formal cooperation agreement between the tribe and the military, recognition of Jack's status as a special deputy, a written report that emphasized the lawful nature of the operation and the legitimate threat posed by the Hendricks gang. In return, Chief Running Eagle would acknowledge federal authority in matters involving United States citizens. The tribe would agree to notify the military of future criminal activity in their territory, and Jack would accept official appointment as a liaison between tribal and federal authorities. It was more than Jack had dared to hope for. Not only would this resolve the immediate crisis, but it would establish a framework for peaceful cooperation that could prevent future conflicts. I accept these terms on behalf of myself, Jack said formally, but Chief Running Eagle must speak for his people. Of course. Shall we ride to the village and present this proposal to your chief? The ride back to the village was tense despite the apparent breakthrough. Jack knew that Captain Mitchell's conciliatory attitude could change quickly if he perceived any sign of treachery or disrespect. One wrong word, one misunderstood gesture, and the fragile peace they had constructed could shatter like glass. But Chief Running Eagle proved equal to the diplomatic challenge. He received Captain Mitchell with formal courtesy, listened to the proposed agreement with grave attention, and responded with the wisdom of a leader who understood the larger implications of this moment. Captain Mitchell, he said in his careful English, you offer terms that serve both our peoples well. We accept your authority in matters of federal law, and we welcome cooperation in maintaining peace in this territory. The formal ceremony that followed was brief but significant. Documents were signed, hands were shaken, and mutual respect was acknowledged on both sides. When Captain Mitchell and his soldiers rode away the next morning, they left behind something that had been rare in relations between whites and Indians, genuine partnership based on mutual benefit, rather than conquest and submission. But for Jack, the resolution of the crisis was overshadowed by anticipation of what was to come. Tomorrow was his wedding day, the beginning of a new life he was still struggling to believe was real. That evening, as the village celebrated their successful resolution of a potentially devastating conflict, he found himself walking alone by the stream. The stars wheeled overhead in patterns unchanged since the beginning of time, and the sound of water flowing over stones provided a peaceful counterpoint to the voices and laughter from the celebration fires. Morningstar found him there, as he had somehow known she would. She moved out of the darkness like a spirit made flesh, beautiful and real, and somehow too good to be true. Tomorrow, she said simply, settling beside him on the bank. Tomorrow, he agreed, though the word seemed inadequate to encompass everything it represented. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past and listening to the night sounds of a world at peace. Jack thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, the violence and loneliness that had defined his past, the courage and love that were shaping his future. Do you have any doubts? Morningstar asked softly. Jack considered the question seriously. Did he doubt that he could be a good husband? Yes. Did he doubt that he could live up to the trust these people had placed in him? Absolutely. Did he doubt that he deserved the happiness that seemed within his grasp? Every day. But did he doubt that this was where he belonged? That Morningstar was the woman he wanted to spend his life loving and protecting? Not for a single moment. Many doubts, he said honestly, but none that matter. She smiled and leaned against his shoulder, her warmth chasing away the chill of the night air. Good. A man without doubts is a man without wisdom. Doubt keeps us humble and makes us try harder to be worthy of our blessings. What about you? Any doubts about marrying a man like me?" She was quiet for so long that he began to worry he had asked the wrong question. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of careful thought. "I doubt that you truly understand how remarkable you are. I doubt that you see yourself as clearly as others see you. I doubt that you realize how much you have already changed from the man who rode into our valley 3 days ago." She turned to face him fully, her dark eyes reflecting starlight. "But I have no doubts about loving you, Jack Morrison. No doubts about the life we will build together. No doubts about the children we will raise or the future we will create." Jack felt something ease in his chest, a tension he had not even realized he was carrying. For so many years he had lived without hope, without any vision of a future that contained more than just survival. Now sitting beside this extraordinary woman under a sky full of stars, he could see possibilities stretching out before him like an uncharted territory waiting to be explored. "I love you," he said, the words feeling both natural and momentous. "I did not think I was capable of such a thing anymore, but you have proven me wrong about that and so many other things." "Love is not a thing to be capable of," she replied. "It is a thing to surrender to. And you, my fierce bounty hunter, have finally learned to surrender." They kissed then softly and thoroughly, sealing promises that needed no words. When they finally separated, Jack felt as though he had been reborn, transformed from a man who took life into a man who gave it meaning. The wedding ceremony the next day was unlike anything Jack had ever experienced. It combined elements of ancient Lakota tradition with innovations designed to welcome him into the tribe as both husband and warrior. He stood beside Morning Star in the center of the village, surrounded by people who had become his family, and spoke vows that bound him not just to his bride but to a way of life he was still learning to understand. Chief Running Eagle performed the ceremony with solemn dignity, his words carrying the weight of countless generations. When he pronounced them husband and wife according to the laws and customs of the Lakota people, the village erupted in celebration that lasted well into the night. But for Jack, the most meaningful moment came much later, when he and Morning Star were finally alone in the teepee that would be their home. She sat beside the fire, brushing her long black hair, and the simple domesticity of the moment overwhelmed him with its beauty. "No more hunting bad men across empty country," she said without looking up from her task. "No more sleeping alone under cold stars. No more wondering if today will be the day you do not come home." "Do you think I will miss it?" he asked, genuinely curious about her perception. She set down her brush and turned to smile at him. "You will miss parts of it, the freedom, perhaps, the simplicity of knowing exactly what you are supposed to do, but you will not miss the loneliness. And you will not miss the emptiness of a life without purpose beyond survival." Jack moved to sit beside her, marveling at how right it felt to be here, in this place, with this woman. "What will my purpose be now? To be a husband, a father, a protector of our people, a bridge between two worlds that need not be enemies." She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "To be the man who chose love over loneliness, hope over despair." Jack squeezed her hand gently, feeling the calluses from years of hard work, the strength that had drawn him to her from the very beginning. "I was lost for so long, Morning Star. I thought I knew who I was, what I was meant to do, but I was just surviving, not living. And now I want to build something, a life, a family, a future worth fighting for." He turned to face her fully, seeing his own reflection in her dark eyes. "I want to be worthy of the gift you have given me." She smiled, that radiant expression that had captured his heart from their first meeting. "You already are, Jack Morrison. You proved that when you killed the bear that was attacking our people. You proved it when you chose to stay instead of riding away. You prove it every day by choosing to become more than you were." Outside their teepee, the celebration continued with singing and laughter, the joyful sounds of a community welcoming new family members. But inside, in the warm glow of their fire, Jack and Morning Star sat in peaceful contentment, two souls who had found their home in each other. "The sacred law brought us together," she whispered against his ear, "but love will keep us together." Jack held her close, understanding finally that some hunts end not with death but with life, not with taking, but with giving, not with solitude, but with connection. He had tracked the Hendricks gang into Lakota territory seeking bounty money. Instead, he had found something infinitely more valuable, a woman who saw past his scars to the man he could become, a people who welcomed him as family, and a future bright with possibilities he had never dared to imagine. As Morning Star settled into his arms and the fire burned low, Jack Morrison, bounty hunter, warrior, husband, closed his eyes and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to prove himself worthy of the trust these people had placed in him. But tonight, for the first time in his adult life, he was truly home.